She was born into chains, but her spirit refused to bow. Harriet Tubman's story begins not with power, nor privilege, but with silence. The silence of fields where the cries of the enslaved were swallowed by the wind. And yet, within this silence, a fire was lit. She fled from bondage, crossing rivers in darkness, forests alive with danger, footsteps echoing with fear. Every shadow could be a pursuer. Every moment could end with capture, or death. And still, she walked forward. Because the promise of freedom was stronger than the weight of chains. But Harriet's journey was not only about saving herself. The moment she breathed free air, she realized something unshakable. Liberty had no taste if her people remained behind in slavery. So she did the unthinkable. She went back. Again and again. Defying the hunters, the laws, the endless dangers. Leading men, women, and children through a secret path called the Underground Railroad. What drives a human being to such courage? What force is greater than fear, greater than survival itself? This is not merely a story of escape. It is the chronicle of a woman who became a conductor of freedom. The Moses of her people. A figure who carried the weight of generations and reshaped history with her steps. In the next moments, we will follow Harriet Tubman's extraordinary path. Her suffering. Her resilience. Her unbreakable faith. And the message she left for us. That true freedom is never walked alone. At the dawn of the 19th century, America carried a wound that bled silently across its soil. A nation proclaiming liberty, yet built upon bondage. In the southern states, slavery was not only a system, it was an atmosphere, a suffocating air breathed by millions. And into this atmosphere, in the year 1822, in the marshlands of Maryland, a child named Araminta Ross was born. The world would one day know her as Harriet Tubman. From her first steps, her life was marked by servitude. She was hired out as a child, carrying heavy loads, working in the fields, tending to households that were not her own. Her body, still fragile, was forced into labor beyond endurance. Beatings, insults, and exhaustion became the language of her childhood. Yet even as her body bent under the weight of oppression, her spirit learned something unspoken, that endurance can be a form of quiet defiance. But fate would carve deeper scars. One day, still a young girl, Harriet found herself in the wrong place at the wrong moment. A slave master hurled a heavy iron weight, aiming to strike another. It missed its target and smashed into her skull. The blow nearly killed her. For days, she drifted between life and death, and though she survived, she was never the same again. From that moment on, she suffered seizures, sudden blackouts, visions that appeared unbidden in her mind. To others, they seemed like weakness, a wound that would forever haunt her. But Harriet saw them differently. Her visions carried the echo of something higher, whispers of guidance, moments where the veil between the earthly and the divine seemed to thin. In her brokenness, she found a strange kind of strength. The chains around her wrists and ankles were real, forged of iron and law. But the visions within her offered another path, one that no master could reach. When the body is imprisoned, the soul learns to wander beyond. When the world denies freedom, the spirit begins to imagine it. And in the heart of a young enslaved girl, barely surviving under cruelty, the seeds of that imagination began to grow. Seeds that one day would break through the soil of oppression, and lead not only herself, but countless others, into the promise of freedom. By the year 1849, Harriet had endured decades of servitude. Her back carried the scars of the whip, her body bore the exhaustion of endless labor, and her heart knew the ache of watching her family remain shackled in bondage. Yet her spirit, scarred but unbroken, whispered one truth: she could not remain enslaved. The time had come. She was still young, but she had already seen too much. Too many mothers weeping as children were sold. Too many fathers vanishing down the road, chained together, never to return. Every passing season deepened her resolve. And so, with nothing more than courage in her chest and faith burning in her soul, Harriet made the decision that would change her life forever. She would run. The journey began in silence, in the shadows of night. Every step was a risk. She knew the penalty for escaping. Capture meant brutal punishment, perhaps death. But she also knew the penalty for staying, a lifetime in chains, her dreams crushed beneath the weight of oppression. She slipped through forests thick with danger, her feet pressing into the mud of swamps and marshes, the cries of night creatures echoing like warnings. She crossed rivers whose cold waters clutched at her legs, threatening to pull her under. Behind her, the hounds could be released at any moment. Ahead of her, only uncertainty. But Harriet clung to something stronger than fear. She clung to the promise of freedom. Each step became a prayer, each breath a plea for guidance. The stars above were her compass, the whispered directions of allies, those brave souls of the Underground Railroad, were her lifeline. She trusted her visions, her inner voice, believing that God Himself was walking with her in the darkness. Days stretched into nights, and still she pressed forward. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, exhaustion bent her body, but the fire within her would not be extinguished. At last, after a journey marked by danger and determination, Harriet arrived in Philadelphia. She stood on free soil for the first time. The air felt different, lighter, unchained. She was free. Yet in that moment of triumph, her joy was pierced by sorrow. Her eyes looked back, not literally, but inwardly, toward Maryland, toward the family and friends still enslaved. Freedom for one was not freedom enough. Her heart ached with the knowledge that her mother, her father, her brothers, her sisters, were still in chains. Later, she would put it into words. I was free, but there was no joy in it, for my family was still in bondage. And so, though she had escaped, Harriet's journey was not complete. Her freedom was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a mission. A mission that would transform her from a woman who had fled slavery into a leader who would return, again and again, to guide others into the light of liberation. Freedom could have been the end of her story. Harriet Tubman had escaped. She had crossed the invisible line that separated bondage from liberty. She could have remained in Philadelphia, building a new life for herself, far from the whips and the chains of Maryland. But Harriet's soul refused to rest. The taste of freedom, instead of bringing peace, filled her with an even deeper hunger. For how could she rejoice in her own liberty while her family and her people still languished in slavery's grip? It was then that Harriet made the decision that would define her forever. She would go back. Not once, not twice, but as many times as it took. Thus began her life as a conductor on the Underground Railroad. Not a train of steel and smoke, but a vast, hidden network of safe houses, coded songs, secret signs, and brave men and women who risked everything to guide fugitives north. It was a road carved not on maps, but in memory and in whispers. Harriet became one of its greatest conductors. Time after time, she slipped back into the slave states, cloaked in shadows, armed with nothing but courage, faith, and a fierce determination. Every journey was a duel with death. Slave catchers patrolled the roads. Posters with her description offered rewards for her capture. And yet, somehow, she always seemed to vanish into the night, leading those who followed her to safety. Her methods were ingenious. She used disguises, sometimes a poor old woman with a shawl pulled over her face, other times a simple field worker. She studied the swamps and rivers, memorizing paths few would dare to cross. She carried coded messages in hymns, turning spirituals into maps. When she sang about crossing Jordan, it meant crossing a river. When she sang of the promised land, it meant reaching the north. Her voice became both a prayer and a compass. On one journey, if a slave grew faint with fear and threatened to turn back, Harriet raised her pistol. Her voice was firm, "You'll be free, or you'll die." It was not cruelty, it was necessity. To return meant exposure. Exposure meant capture. And capture meant the destruction of the mission. She carried not only lives in her hands, but hope itself. Over the years, Harriet guided groups large and small. Men, women, children, each step they took behind her was a step away from the darkness of bondage. She led them through forests where the trees seemed to whisper, through marshes where the water rose to their waists, under skies where stars became their only guide. And with every soul she delivered into freedom, her legend grew. It is estimated that Harriet Tubman freed over 70 people directly, in at least 13 expeditions into the South. But her influence reached far beyond numbers. Those she saved carried their stories forward, spreading word of the fearless woman who could not be caught. They called her Moses. Like the prophet who led his people out of Egypt, Harriet led hers out of slavery's Egypt, across rivers and wilderness, toward a promised land of liberty. The nickname spread, whispered in cabins and in fields, fueling both fear among masters and faith among the enslaved. Yet the danger was constant. Every journey meant sleepless nights, exhaustion pressing down like a weight, hunger gnawing at her strength. And still she pressed on, because each face beside her, each trembling child, each desperate mother, was a reminder of why she returned. Every escape was a miracle stitched together by courage. Every arrival in the North was a resurrection. And every successful journey was another crack in the foundation of slavery. Harriet Tubman did not see herself as a hero. She saw herself as an instrument of faith, of freedom, of destiny. When asked how she never lost a single passenger, she replied with unshakable certainty. "I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger." Her life became a rhythm of departure and arrival, danger and deliverance. A rhythm that beat against the silence of oppression, louder than whips, stronger than chains. And as the legend of the woman called Moses spread, Harriet's mission was no longer a secret. It became a light so bright that even the shadows of slavery could not extinguish it. The more Harriet Tubman returned, the more dangerous her mission became. Her name was whispered among the enslaved as hope, and among the masters as terror. Word spread of a woman guiding fugitives through darkness, and soon posters with her description appeared across the South. Rewards were offered for her capture, alive or dead. Slave catchers, armed and relentless, patrolled roads, rivers, and towns, hunting for the mysterious figure they called Moses. But Harriet did not waver. She moved like smoke through the night, elusive, untouchable. What gave her such courage? She carried something deeper than fear, an unshakable faith. Her injury, once thought a curse, became to her a strange blessing. The visions and premonitions that seized her mind often came at critical moments, pulling her back from danger, guiding her steps as if a hand from above was pointing the way. When her companions trembled, Harriet's voice would rise in prayer or in song, steadying their hearts. When the shadows thickened with danger, her eyes lifted to the heavens, trusting that the same God who had parted the Red Sea for Moses would open a path for her too. Her courage was not born of recklessness, but of conviction. She believed she was chosen to be a vessel of deliverance. And then came the Civil War. Harriet's mission expanded from secret conductor to active soldier in the struggle for freedom. She served first as a nurse, tending to wounded soldiers, her hands carrying both healing and compassion. But she was more than a caretaker, she was a strategist. Her knowledge of southern terrain, the hidden paths, the waterways, and the habits of slaveholders made her an invaluable guide. The Union Army recognized her gifts and enlisted her as a scout and spy. She gathered intelligence, infiltrated enemy lines, and mapped routes that would prove decisive. Her bravery reached its peak in 1863, during the Combahee River Raid in South Carolina. On that night, Harriet Tubman, once an enslaved girl beaten into silence, now stood as the first woman in American history to lead an armed military expedition. Guiding Union boats through mine-laced waters, she led troops in a raid that burned plantations, destroyed supplies, and, most importantly, liberated more than 700 enslaved men, women, and children in a single stroke. It was liberation on a scale Harriet had never before witnessed. The sound of chains breaking was no longer just metaphor, it was reality, multiplied hundreds of times in one night of fire and deliverance. With this, Harriet's role transcended conductor. She was no longer simply guiding fugitives in secrecy, she was shaping the course of a nation at war. She had become a strategist of freedom, a commander whose courage and vision struck at the very heart of slavery. And still, even amidst armies and battles, Harriet remained true to her essence. A woman who feared nothing but failing the mission given to her. A mission she believed came not from man, but from God. When the war ended, Harriet Tubman did not return to a life of ease. Freedom for the nation did not mean comfort for her. She lived in modesty, often in poverty, her sacrifices rewarded with little material support. Even after leading men into battle, after freeing hundreds, she struggled simply to survive. Yet Harriet never measured her worth by wealth. Her treasure was elsewhere, in the lives she had touched, in the chains she had broken, in the generations who now walked free because she had dared. Recognition came slowly, almost reluctantly. She was granted a small pension for her service in the Union Army, but history had not yet caught up to her greatness. Still, Harriet pressed on, because her mission was never about glory. She turned her energy toward new battles. The freedom of the body had been won for millions, but what of the freedom of the mind, of the spirit, of the voice? Harriet joined the movement for women's suffrage, standing alongside other pioneers who demanded the right to vote. She spoke not with grand speeches, but with the undeniable authority of a life lived in sacrifice. Her presence alone was testimony. If a woman could lead men into war, could she not also have a voice in shaping the future? Though she faced poverty, though she carried the scars of her past, Harriet Tubman never ceased to fight for others. Her life was proof that true courage is not measured by what we take for ourselves, but by what we give to those around us. And so her legacy endures, not only in history books, not only in monuments, but in every soul who dares to believe that freedom is not complete until it is shared. She lived, not for herself, but for all. And that is why, even today, the name Harriet Tubman still carries the weight of impossible courage. Harriet Tubman's story is not just history, it is a mirror. It forces us to ask questions we might prefer to avoid. Because courage, as she showed us, is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to walk forward, even when fear tightens around the chest like iron. Think of her, standing in the silence of the night, guiding trembling hands through forests where danger lurked at every step. Think of her, knowing that capture meant death, and yet returning again and again. And ask yourself, what would you do, if the choice before you was your life, or the freedom of others? Her life whispers a truth we cannot escape. Every generation carries its own chains. Some are visible, heavy and cruel. Others are hidden, forged in silence, in prejudice, in the subtle prisons of inequality and indifference. The mission to liberate did not end with Harriet. It belongs now to us. To see the chains of our time, to confront them, and to act not only for ourselves, but for those who cannot yet walk free. Harriet's example is both challenge and invitation. She reminds us that resilience is not only about surviving storms, it is about creating shelter for others when the storm rages against them. It is not enough to break free if the people beside us remain bound. Perhaps the greatest act of courage is not victory for oneself, but the opening of paths so others, too, may cross. That is the heartbeat of her legacy. And that is the question she leaves us with. Will we be content with our own freedom, or will we, like Harriet, risk everything to ensure that freedom is shared? Her footsteps still echo. And if we listen closely, they do not simply tell a story of the past. They call us, here and now, to take our place on the long road toward liberation.